Carrie, this is Alzajjera live from Doha. Also coming up, China will be on the agenda as well, as U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson visits India, a trip being closely watched by Pakistan. Putting down their weapons, Kurds say they'll freeze the results of a secession vote and seek talks with Iraq. Plus,
two French soldiers grabbed me. They forced themselves inside of me. I screamed. They strangled me and covered my mouth.
The UN is criticized for failing to prosecute its peacekeepers accused of rape and sexual abuse in the Central African Republic. China's Communist Party has revealed its new leadership team headed by President Xi Jinping. Premier Liu Keqiang was the only one to retain his top spot in the seven-man lineup, but there's no clear successor to Xi, which with all committee members aged at least 60. So that means they'd be too old to take over the next party Congress in 2022, further strengthening Xi's firm grip on power.
中国特色社会主义进入了新时代。
Socialism with Chinese characteristics has entered into a new era. The new era must showcase these new faces and need to have new actions. In 2018, we will have the 40th anniversary of opening up. It is a very important thing, determining the fate of China. 40 years of reforming and opening up has led Chinese people to their moderately prosperous society and are becoming richer and richer. We need to draw from this experience and continue to modernize the governance and system of China.
Andrew Thomas is in Beijing. So, Andrew, the composition of this new standing committee, what does this tell us about Xi's ambitions?
Well, you've made the point, really. These are all relatively old men. They're all in their 60s. At this point in a 10-year presidency, traditionally, by convention, you'd expect to see somebody in their 50s elevated to that top tier. Xi himself was 10 years ago when he was 54. He was seen as the coming leader, the man waiting in the wings. Xi does not want that. He doesn't want anyone to be seen as the coming leader, someone who could eclipse him over the term of his presidency. And as a result, all these men are in their 60s. That in itself is very significant. There's also an omission of women. Chairman Mao said that women hold up half the sky. There has never been a woman on the Standing Committee of the Communist Party, and there isn't now, so that hasn't changed. But I think, in all seriousness, the most important point is the age of those who are on this Standing Committee, and the fact that even though one or two people were talked about in their 50s who could have made the top table, they're not there. That suggests President Xi wants to be seen in complete control of his party, potentially the leader beyond 2022.
So who are the key players going to be? What are they going to focus on? What are their priorities?
Well, to run through a few names, they're all loyalists, and the one who is closest perhaps to President Xi is a man called Li Zhangshu. Now, the two of them are like that. President Xi and Li Zhangshu have been together right back into the early 80s when they were both young party officials in Hebei province, and they've really stuck together ever since. So they've got a right loyalist there, right by Xi's side. Other noted names there, Wang Yan. He's been leading President Xi's priority anti-poverty drive over the last few years. This is a promotion for him. That's seen as having gone well, and he's now at the top table. He's also been leading some of the talks between China and the United States on economic affairs. So foreign investors will be relieved to see somebody at that top table who knows that relationship, that crucial relationship, of course, with Donald Trump, making trade between China and the US such a hot-button issue. Well, they've got somebody there who knows that issue very, very well. One other name I'll lead you to, Zhao Leji. He's the youngest of them all at 60. He's been elevated to run the anti-corruption drive that Xi Jinping has made so much of over the last 5 years. He said in his introduction, Xi Jinping, that he wanted to continue to root out the virus, implicitly, of corruption in the party. Well, this man, Zhao Leji, is going to be the man to do it. In terms of what they're going to do, well, in his introduction to his new team, President Xi said this was a new look, these men, for a new achievement in the new era. That phrase again, the new era coming up. There have been two previous eras. The first to establish the Communist Party state, Chairman Mao. The second under Deng Xiaoping, and afterwards the economic liberalisation, what has made China rich. President Xi sees this moment as the start of a third era, to continue economic development, but being more balanced in that development, spread wealth more among Chinese people, and in harmony, as he puts it, with nature, so taking the environment more seriously. He also is suggesting a more assertive approach to foreign affairs, getting involved in other countries, assistance to other countries as they need it, and he wants to try and bring all the parts of China, as he sees it, back together. That means bringing Hong Kong, Macau firmly back into the fold, but also, of course, Taiwan. President Xi considers that part of China. He wants to do something about that in his second term.
Okay, Andrew Thomas, live for us in Beijing. Andrew, thank you. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is now in India. It's his latest stop in a tour that has taken him to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Pakistan. Patty Culhane reports on the messages Tillerson is likely sending with his time spent in both Pakistan and India.
During his time in office, President Donald Trump has had his fair share of visits with foreign leaders. Some went better than others. But he reserved a special honor for India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, the first to have a private dinner with him in the White House. Just the first sign that the Trump administration would take a different tact in the region. That was laid out in the U.S. Secretary of State's speech previewing his trip, where he only had a few passing comments about Pakistan.
Pakistan, too, is an important U.S. partner in South Asia. Our relationships in the region stand on their own merits. We expect Pakistan to take decisive action against terrorist groups based within their own borders that threaten their own people and the broader region.
The U.S. has long claimed both relationships are basically equally important, but when Tillerson spoke about India, his was a noticeably different tone, casting it as a critical economic and military alliance.
In this period of uncertainty and somewhat angst, India needs a reliable partner on the world stage. I want to make clear, with our shared values and vision for global stability and prosperity, the United States is that partner. And with India's youth, its optimism, its powerful democratic example, and its increasing stature on the world stage, it makes perfect sense that the United States, at this time, should seek to build on the strong foundation of our years of cooperation with India.
In India, Tillerson will visit a cultural site, the Gandhi Museum, have a news conference, and actually sleep in India. He didn't do any of those things in Pakistan. The U.S. might deny it, but with this visit, it is sending a clear message to both Pakistan and India that it does, in fact, have a favorite. Patty Culhane, Alzajjera.
A Kurdish regional government in Iraq has suggested freezing the results of a secession referendum, which triggered a confrontation with the central government. The Kurds say they're ready for talks with Baghdad, and they want a ceasefire. Kurdish Peshmerga forces have been fighting government troops near a key oil pipeline. Stephanie Decker joins us live from the Iraqi-Syrian border. So is this kind of a stand down, a timeout, Stephanie?
Well, it's a very unexpected statement, really, because the KRG, the Kurdistan Regional Government, has always said that the results of the referendum were a red line. The demand from Baghdad was that the results needed to be annulled before any dialogue to take place. So now what we have is an offer from the regional government here saying, let's freeze and I think this kind of language is important. Let's see what that means and whether Baghdad accepts it. Let's freeze the results. Let's have an immediate ceasefire and let's go into dialogue. Now, let me just explain to you where we are, which I think has some part of that. We are in northern Iraq, of course, but it's at the point of Triangle where there was fighting yesterday. Now, just behind us, those mountains you see around 2 kilometers is Syria. And then a little further north, you have Turkey. So this is a crucial point. Now, there was fighting here yesterday morning, just a little further, about 20 kilometers down from where we are, between Iraqi forces, the Shia militias, and the Peshmerga. And there was a real concern that the plan was for the Iraqi forces to come all the way up this border and essentially cut off the border crossing, which is held by Kurds on both sides. Now, very briefly, so these are important things, Rochelle. And you have the Iraqi Prime Minister today. He's currently on his way to Turkey, where he'll be meeting with the Turkish president. He will then be going to Iran. These are two countries that are hugely invested in what has happened here over the last week or so. So I think interesting now, the ball is in Abadi's court, and we're going to have to wait and see what his reaction will be to that offer from the Kurdish regional government here.
Okay, Steph, stay close, because there's something else that we need your input on. Iraqi forces are launching an offensive to recapture the last part of Iraqi territory still in ISIL hands. ISIL has suffered two major defeats in Iraq in recent months after fierce fighting in Mosul and Hawija. So let's go back to you now, Stephanie, in Erbil. Put this in context for us, how much progress Iraq has made in the battle against ISIL and what this next step means.
Well, this is almost the byproduct of the fighting and the skirmishes that we've seen between the Iraqis and the Peshmerga, because ISIL is almost largely territorial defeated in this country. It does still have pockets, particularly what you're talking about in Anbar province. This is West Iraq, bordering Syria. Now, what they're saying today, they have dropped leaflets on an area called Al-Qaim. This is the Iraqi side of the Iraq-Syria border, still held by ISIL. This has been in the build-up for a while, Rochelle. They've been fighting in this area. They've been taking, villages and towns, and now it seems that they are in the final preparations for the final push on the border area. It hasn't happened yet, but warnings have been dropped in the form of leaflets. They've done this before. Also, the coalition has done this, warning residents about what is imminent. It's important because it's some of the lost territory that ISIL holds. It's also important because it's a border crossing, and it's on the main highway to Baghdad from Syria. The Syrian side is called Abu Kamal, also still held by ISIL. So once they achieve that, and again, it hasn't started effectively as a military operation yet, it will essentially be cutting off the last border crossing that ISIL holds. And of course, ISIL's propaganda machine was very much about the state, about, cutting down foreign-imposed borders. So this would be sort of coming back to that. And then very briefly, there's also concern, because it's such a complicated story, Rochelle, is of the Iranian influence, of the Iranian militias, of territory that, Iranian-influenced military brigades hold. There is a concern, of course, if that area falls into those kinds of hands, that Iran would have a swathe of territory that gives it access, from Iraq to Syria to Lebanon. So all these forces are at play. It is geopolitical, it is regional, it is complicated. But again, when it just coming back to the basics of that offensive, the warnings are out there. The actual military offensive hasn't started as of yet.
Okay. Stephanie Decker live for us in Erbil. Thank you. U.S. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order introducing tough new measures on refugees coming to the United States. He previously banned new entries for 120 days while his administration conducted a review. That ban has now expired and has been lifted. So the new measures include more rigorous vetting and screening of all asylum seekers. And for the next 90 days, people from 11 countries considered to be high risk will only be allowed in on a case-by-case basis. The administration, however, hasn't named those countries. Gabrielle Alzajjera reports from New York that there's still lots of confusion about the new rules.
For refugees around the world looking for a safe place to call home, the doors to the United States are once again open, but with limitations. The Trump administration has technically resumed refugee admissions to the U.S., but vetting will get tougher.
Big stuff.
Addresses, phone numbers, and emails will now be collected from not only refugee applicants, but also potentially their family members. The government will be asking for information dating back 10 years. Social media accounts will also be scrutinized. But for refugees from 11, what the administration has described as high-risk countries, another 90-day period has been put in place to further review the vetting process. Refugees from those countries, not yet named, will only be admitted on a strict case-by-case basis, leaving many people in limbo. It's all just one part of President Trump's controversial effort to limit immigration, which has sparked protests and court challenges. The administration says the new measures are to protect national security, but opponents see the new vetting procedures as a thinly guised effort to bar Muslims from the country.
It sends the message that, they can go through the most difficult of circumstances. They can endure incredible hardships and still be faced with this blanket suspicion that they have to prove that they're worthy of being resettled and they deserve to be safe and secure.
Last month, President Trump lowered the number of refugees allowed into the country to 45,000, the lowest number in decades. The Trump administration says the new vetting procedures are a way to protect America against terrorism. But the fact remains that not one single person admitted to the United States as a refugee has ever been implicated in any act of terrorism. Gabriel Alzajjera, Alzajjera, New York.
Still ahead on Alzajjera, we'll tell you why Syrian refugees are facing abuse and violence in Lebanon.